Today, in a marathon meeting in Georgia, the new pro-Trump majority of the Georgia State Election Board, they passed a whole bunch of new rules, yet more new rules today, 46 days out from the election, including one that requires a hand count of ballots. I mean, reminder here that Georgia has 11 million people. I'll quote here from the Washington Post's coverage of this shock decision today in Georgia. Quote, democracy advocates accused the board of intentionally injecting chaos and uncertainty into the presidential contest. Election supervisors and poll workers said hand counts would take too long, cost money, and almost certainly produce counting errors. The Office of the Republican State Attorney General, which is responsible for advising the board, wrote in an opinion that the change was, quote, unlawful. Nevertheless, the board voted 3-2 to approve the measure. Quote, research and practice have shown again and again that hand counting ballots is less accurate than machine tallies, and that it can take days, weeks, or months, depending on the size of the jurisdiction. Again, 11 million people in Georgia. Quote, critics say because the hand counting requirement would almost certainly inject error into the tabulation process, it could give county boards the evidence they need, meaning the pretext they need, to delay certification. Some questioned whether it amounts to intentional sabotage of state elections. Yeah, it's one thing to say falsely that there's something wrong in the elections. It's another thing to actually monkey wrench the works so that Georgia really can't count its vote. Radical stuff going on in Georgia. Not just creating false propaganda about election problems that aren't there, but now moving on to actually creating real election problems for real. They're going to try to make Georgia take months to count. It's not just going to test our patience. It would break the system, because if it's going to take months, at that point, the deadlines for Georgia and every other state producing their electoral votes will have long passed. The good news here is that Georgians turned out in significant numbers today to say no to this. The opposition at this event was sustained and articulate and very, very present. And I can't help but believe that that matters.
The idea that you're not going to listen to the individuals that are charged with conducting elections is absurd to me. We all have given our lives. Most of us work decades in these career paths. And to say that we don't know what we're talking about, you wouldn't say that to any other professional. I've stayed at a lot of Waffle Houses in my life, but that does not qualify me to operate a Waffle House. Listen to the experts.
Listen to the experts. That was the local elections director from Douglas County, Georgia today, speaking before the state elections board in Georgia. Before that board voted on a whole bunch of new rules today that aim to pretty radically change the way elections are run in Georgia just a month and a half before Election Day. The board held a public comment period today before taking the vote. Dozens of people showed up to do what is essentially a civic duty in a circumstance like this, to tell the board face-to-face, to be on the record opposing these radical changes to essentially undo the state's election rules and processes right before the presidential race.
The recent actions of the board sow chaos and dramatically undermine trust in our constitutional republic and its democratic processes.
I'm glad to serve as a poll worker, even though it can be cumbersome, tiring, and stressful at times. All of these proposals are attempting to remedy problems that don't exist.
This timeline is not just tight, it is impossible. Imagine the uncertainty and the confusion and the added burden on election workers and county budgets. These rules do not protect our elections, they undermine them.
Your actions attempt to stack the deck for a particular outcome, and that is the definition of anti-democratic.
I think what is happening is we are setting up our counties to fail. And when these counties fail, when there are inaccuracies, if there is a result of the election that some of the members of this board do not like, they will be able to point to those inaccuracies, and they will say that that the election is inaccurate, that there is a lack of integrity in the election.
The last speaker there is a state representative in Georgia named Syra Draper. She's telling the Georgia Election Board there essentially, hey, I'm onto you, that she believes the motive behind what they're doing is not just to create an illusion that there's something wrong with Georgia's election results, but actually to set Georgia elections up to fail, to make the administration of this election so chaotic and so impossible that Georgia actually won't be able to produce a clear result. And then they can point at that and say, see, look at all these problems in our elections. We should throw out the vote. Or at least we should fight over this and have this tied up in court so long that maybe the state's votes for the Electoral College never make it in time, never make it to Washington in time for the Electoral College count. Joining us now, I'm happy to say, is Sarah Tindall Gesell. She's the lone Democrat on the Georgia State Election Board. She voted against the rule change today that requires hand counting the ballots. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's been a very, very long day, and this has been a very stressful period.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Can I just ask you if you feel like, if I've been mischaracterizing anything that's happened at the election board, or if you feel like the public understanding broadly as the nation's eyes sort of turn to Georgia, if there's been any fundamental misunderstandings about what's happening there, if you feel like those of us observing this from afar pretty much understand what's going on?
Well, the one thing I want to make sure is clear is we're not hand tabulating the ballots. We're simply hand counting the number of ballots. But again, we're just weeks away from the election. So for counties to try to retrain their poll workers and their poll managers, for them to hire more workers, because workers who've been out there for 14, 16 hours a day and are not in any shape to count thousands of ballots accurately, it's just absolutely untenable. So I don't see any other explanation for this other than exactly as Representative Draper said, which is setting counties up for failure.
I think a lot of people who've been watching what have been happening in Georgia, particularly now that the Secretary of State has weighed in and advised that some of these proposed changes seem to be in contravention of Georgia law, now that the Attorney General's office have weighed in and said this is beyond, some of these changes are beyond the statutory authority of the board. I think a lot of people are looking at that and thinking, well, the board is doing all these things, but none of it'll stand, that this will all get blocked by the courts, that Georgia's elections won't be affected by the chaos that these rules, at least on paper, would seem to be injecting into the process. Do you share that confidence? Do you think the courts will essentially come to the rescue here and keep Georgia's normal election procedures in place?
Well, I certainly have hope that they will do that. Confidence. I'm not nearly as confident as some of the commentary that I've seen and read, because it's a really narrow window, both in terms of time and in terms of the legal theory, because there is. It's hard to sue the state. There's sovereign immunity questions that come into play. The fact that my colleagues are willing to completely disregard advice of our counsel, we are represented by the Attorney General's office. We were told flat out that this was not a lawful use of our authority. That I found actually quite shocking.
I wondered when I saw that today, especially when the chairman of the board, who voted the same way that you did on most of these rule changes, when he explicitly noted at today's hearing, we are taking this action. If you vote in favor of this, this is in contravention of the legal advice we have been given about what we are legally allowed to do. I wondered if there might actually be potentially worries among the majority of the board that voted for those changes that they might have been contravening Georgia law simply by taking this vote and trying to take actions that they're not legally allowed to take. You
would think, but I also would suspect that if they were actually concerned about it, they would have voted differently, because this counting the ballots is theater. Frankly, it doesn't add actual security. There are so many backups and ways of making sure that we know how many ballots were cast. It's confirmed 3 different ways. So it seems that they have some other motive.
Sarah Tyndall Gazelle, the lone Democrat on the Georgia Election Board. As I said, I know that you're in a very difficult spot on this board. The eyes of the nation really are on Georgia. Thank you for taking time to talk to us again. I hope you wouldn't mind coming back and talking to us again as these things evolve. It's going to be a really, really important next 46 days to see how this all resolves in your critical state.
Well, I hope I'll have better news next time.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Earlier this week, I told you about two beautiful young women, Candy Miller and Amber Nicole Thurman, vibrant young moms from Georgia who died preventable deaths, all because their state has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. Candy Miller was left to die alone at home because she was too afraid to seek medical treatment as she suffered through a self-managed abortion. Amber Nicole Thurman went to a hospital, but she was dismissed for 20 hours as she lay in excruciating pain because medical professionals were too afraid to help. Last night, Amber's mom had this message for thousands of Americans.
I want y'all to know Amber was not a statistic. She was loved by a family, a strong family. And we would have done whatever to get my baby, our baby, the help that she needed.
Vice President Kamala Harris met with the family of Amber Nicole Thurman in Michigan on Thursday when they appeared at the Unite America town hall hosted by Oprah Winfrey. Today, Harris honored the lives of Amber and others, but she also laid their deaths squarely at the doorstep of Donald Trump and the 6 conservative Republicans on the Supreme Court who helped expedite it.
Amber's mother, Shanette, told me that the word preventable is over and over again in her head when she learned about how her child died. This is a healthcare crisis. This is a healthcare crisis, and Donald Trump is the architect of this crisis. He brags about overturning Roe v. Wade. In his own words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," he says. He is proud that women are dying, proud that doctors and nurses could be thrown in prison for administering care, proud that young women today have fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers. How dare he?
Harris also took the time to give voice to the millions of American women who are navigating the same lonely, persecuted path. One of those women was Caitlin Joshua, who lives in Louisiana, which happens to have a near total abortion ban. Doctors refused to see her before 12 weeks because, according to an official, too many women miscarry in that period, and they didn't want to be held liable. It was then that she started having problems. While at the hospital, she realized she was miscarrying, but the hospital staff left her in the dark about what was happening and gave her no options. She went home, but when the pain and bleeding became so severe, she went to another hospital, but was also refused care because they didn't want to be investigated for facilitating an abortion. Caitlin and her husband were left demoralized and angry by the experience. She had to mourn the loss, but thankfully she survived, but with little faith in the modern American medical system, courtesy of Donald Trump. Caitlin Joshua joins me now. She is traveling the country on behalf of the Harris Walz campaign. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here. I recall your speech at the DNC and then rereading your story. It was horrifying all over again. And I just want you to just voice for people who don't understand, you know, how it feels to be a woman pregnant. You know you're pregnant. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. You go to a clinic and they say, we don't even want to see you because of this state's abortion ban.
Yes, and thank you again for having me tonight. And the best way I can put it into words is it is extremely demoralizing. It's very difficult to accept the fact that we live in a post-Roe society that is putting up barriers for women to seek basic maternal health care, much less abortion care. In that moment, when my husband and I found ourselves in a healthcare crisis and I'm trying to navigate this system, I don't have a medical background. I'm seeking help from a physician because I know they have the expertise and training to be able to handle my my miscarriage. And in that moment, I saw, and still I'm hearing about these stories coming out of the Deep South today, as we've heard these recent stories of 2 women who lost their lives as a result of Trump's Trump's abortion ban that is existing in 22 states. And so we know that if we don't do the work this fall to be able to vote on reproductive freedom, we will see this ban take effect all over this country. And this is just a stark reality of what can happen. My story, Amber's story, the other young lady's story, this is very much indicative of what can potentially happen in our country if we allow it.
And I will say that, you are so lucky to be alive because Black women already suffer disproportionately death during childbirth and during pregnancy. So you are very, very lucky, particularly in a state like Louisiana that has fewer and fewer OBGYNs. Doctors are leaving that state. The state's abortion ban is so strict, it's even hard to find a hospital. Do you see the impact just among your friends, people you know, of just not being able to even find a doctor who even will work in the state of Louisiana at this point?
Yes, I think that is the most disappointing and uninspiring part of this story, right? The story continues. We may have seen overturn of Roe v. Wade 2 years ago, and then, of course, my state's trigger ban immediately came into effect. But the women that look like me are being disproportionately affected by these laws, these very egregious laws. And when you take a state like Louisiana and across all 64 parishes, we already have maternity care deserts. When you add that layered issue with an abortion ban on top of Black maternal health care statistics already being so starkly alarming in our state, you're talking about a healthcare crisis that is unimaginable, that no one should have to face. And so I worry for my girlfriends who are currently pregnant, who contact me all the time and ask for, different ways to navigate the system or advice on this or that. And my heart goes out to them. And there isn't much for me to be able to provide them outside of, kind of what to look for, how to, get ahead of your healthcare. But why should we have to do that as pregnant people that are just seeking care that is something that every single woman in this country deserves to be able to have at their disposal?
Yeah. And, I wonder, and this is the thing I always wonder about, whether folks are identifying where to place the blame. Right? I mean, we saw Georgia pass a 6-week abortion ban or a 6-week abortion ban, a trigger ban went into law there. There was no punishment for Brian Kemp or the Republican legislators who did that. They got easily reelected. And people even praised Brian Kemp for standing up to Donald Trump on occasion. In your state, voter turnout, I say this all the time, was 23% when Landry got elected governor, knowing that he was a fierce opponent of a woman having control of her own body.
In contrast to Harris jetting from Michigan to Georgia to Wisconsin in this 24-hour period, Trump in this 24-hour period has kind of gone fallow today. No events, no travel, no appearances. I don't know what he's doing. That said, that may potentially be for the best for his campaign. I say that because the last event he did for his campaign was yesterday, and it produced headlines like this all day today. This was at Huffington Post today. Dawn shocks. If I lose, blame the Jews. Now, I should say, in fairness, I need to note that this headline from our friends at Huffington Post is entirely accurate. I mean, you may think they are exaggerating with a headline like that, but they are not. Here's what it looks like at the Drudge Report tonight. Trump, blame the Jews if I lose. And again, in fairness to the people who operate the Drudge Report, that headline is accurate because that is a fair characterization. That is actually what Trump said. And he did it twice. It started at an event that was supposed to be against anti-Semitism. Stick a pin in that amazing fact just for a moment. But he got up at this event yesterday and he said this. He said, quote, I am not going to call this a prediction, but in my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with a loss, meaning they'd have a lot to do with an election loss by him. That was the first event. Then he went to a second event the same night, last night, and he said it again, even more pointedly, just in case people didn't get it the first time. He said at the second event, quote, if I don't win this election, the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if it happens. These were not closed-door events. These were not off-the-record events. This is him putting it on the record for the American people. Hey, if I lose the election, blame the Jews.
I'm not going to call this as a prediction, but in my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss.
If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens.
Right? I mean, what can possibly go wrong? Jews are like 2% of the American population. But according to the Republican candidate for president and former president, if anything goes wrong in this next election for him, blame the Jews. It'll be the Jews' fault. Jews are like 2.4% of the American population. Put it on them. As I mentioned, the first comments from him were at an event which is supposed to be an anti-Semitism event. What is anti-Semitism again? Well, most of the time, it's people saying, hey, pay no attention to who's ostensibly in charge, because really it's the Jews in charge, and so you can blame them for all bad things. Most of the time, that is what anti-Semitism looks like, which is exactly what Trump is doing. Just astonishing. We're 46 days out, and the Republican candidate for president is telling America, if I lose, blame Jewish people. That is really where we are in the campaign right now. And it turns out it's worse because this is not just a couple of comments at a couple of adjacent events. This is turning into kind of a theme week for them. Remember when he used to declare infrastructure week all the time and nothing ever happened? This is a different kind of week, a much worse one. All in the space of a few days, we've got Trump saying twice, if I lose the election, blame the Jews. Within a day of that, we also get the release of an interview that his running mate did with an RNC primetime speaker, former host from the Fox News channel, who very famously just did a celebratory, laudatory, totally uncritical 2-hour fan fest interview with a Holocaust denier, in which the two of them talked about how Hitler wasn't the bad guy in World War II. I mean, this is a guy, to be clear, who says we need to be more understanding of the fact that really Hitler was just looking for a solution, in his words, for, quote, an acceptable solution to the Jewish problem. That's all he was doing. Why can't we be more understanding of that? He wasn't a bad guy. He was just looking for an acceptable solution to the Jewish problem. After this former Fox News host and the primetime RNC speaker interviewed him for 2 hours and praised him as the best public historian in the country, his podcast, or his own podcast, the Holocaust Denier guy, went to #1 in the country. And the most notorious, like, famous godfathers of Holocaust denial in this country all praised it, right? Said they wanted credit. Finally, their words are getting out there. #1 podcast in the country on Apple Podcasts. On the day the White House had to put out a denunciation of that guy and the fact that an RNC primetime speaker just did a laudatory 2-hour interview praising him, on the same day the White House had to put out their denunciation of that, J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for vice president, taped an interview with that same RNC speaker and Fox News host who had just celebrated America's best public historian, as America's best public historian, this Holocaust denial guy. So now that J.D. Vance interview, which was taped at that auspicious time, it's just come out. You know, great timing, right in time for Blame the Jews Day from his running mate. In that interview, which again has just come out, J.D. Vance makes the case that we don't really have a democracy in this country. And why not we shouldn't have a democracy in the future. It's not making that argument, although he kind of is. What he's saying is that we don't have a democracy now. And why is it that he thinks we don't have a democracy now? Because he says there's a secret, powerful group who really controls things behind the scenes. So we should blame them.
In reality, right now, we don't live in a real democracy in this country, right? The people who call the shots in this country have further and further divorced themselves from any kind of real democratic accountability, right?
It's like a junior high school class in how this stuff works. Why exactly do we always get like Holocaust denial and weird blame the Jews stuff going along with anti-democratic movements and movements to end democracy and to install a strongman or a fascist form of government instead? Why do these things go together? Well, wouldn't you know it, that specific idea also came up.
So if you guys win and you start firing people who are acting against orders of their commander-in-chief and against the expressed will of voters, the New York Times will call it a fascist takeover.
That's exactly right.
So the question is, do you care?
Well, I think we have to not care.
We have to not care. Yes, what we're going to do, some people will call it a fascist takeover. But that's not, any concern to us. It's what we're going to do. So we're not going to care when they call it a fascist takeover. Because after all, our so-called democracy is a sham anyway. Would it really be so bad to give it up, since we all know who's really in charge? Right? And Trump says you can blame them if he loses. I mean, this is the worst theme week ever. Trump did his blame the Jews thing yesterday, twice, just after the yes, it's going to look like a fascist takeover and no, we don't care interview came out. Now today, they're doing nothing, neither of them doing any campaign stuff at all. Tomorrow, J.D. Vance is going to do a live appearance with that same interviewer, a for-profit ticketed event. And Trump is going to go to North Carolina tomorrow, where his campaign says he has no plans to distance himself from or denounce the Republican candidate for governor who Trump endorsed there. The same candidate who reportedly announced himself online years ago as, quote, a black Nazi. Quote, I'm a black Nazi. The all capitals on the word Nazi and the exclamation point at the end of it, those are not my embellishments. Those are his, according to online posts that CNN has somewhat meticulously documented as those of Trump-endorsed Republican candidate for North Carolina governor, Mark Robinson. In other online posts, he said he preferred Hitler to any American politician in Washington. Now, the latest reporting tonight is that his online remarks also include him explicitly praising Mein Kampf. So Republican gubernatorial candidate Mark Robinson is denying all of this. He is rejecting calls to quit the governor's race in North Carolina. No Republicans in the state appear to have denounced him for these specific posts in which he praises Hitler and proclaims himself to be a Nazi. No Republicans in the state apparently feel the need to distance themselves from it, and apparently neither does Trump. The deadline for removing Mr. Robinson from the ballot passed at midnight last night. So apparently they are sticking with him. I told you this is the worst theme week ever.
I think one of the hottest politicians in the United States of America, and has become a friend of mine, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Thank you, Mark. This is Martin Luther King on steroids, okay? Now, I told that to Mark. I said, I think you're better than Martin Luther King. I think you are Martin Luther King times 2. I said to this man, and when he endorsed me, he gave a speech, and I said, you are Dr. Martin Luther King on steroids. That's how good you are. You are unbelievable as a speaker. And he got up, and he's doing fantastically well in North Carolina, and I think he's going to be the next governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson.
Hi again, everybody. It is 5 o'clock now in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in this Friday for my friend Nicole Wallace. That sound you hear, it is just the low rumble of an entire political apparatus acting with new purpose. Their mission to get you to see the video we just watched over and over and over again. As we speak, Democrats are mustering their messaging might to make a connection in voters' minds, to link Donald Trump and Mark Robinson, his choice for North Carolina governor. Now, we won't belabor the specifics of the salacious accusations surrounding Robinson this afternoon, other than to say a CNN report detailed a number of racist and sexually explicit messages posted on a porn site years before he entered politics. One post attributed to Robinson from 2010 is a declaration, quote, I'm a black Nazi. Another post, quote, slavery is not bad. And then there's the story attributed to Robinson, in which he recounts peeping on naked women when he was a teenager. We should note here, NBC News has not yet verified the authenticity of these messages. CNN's reporting suggests the username traces back to other similar ones across a number of social media platforms. And certain posts contain details that matched up with Robinson's personal life. And for his part, Robinson and his team, they are denying any of these posts came from him and that he never created or used such an account. Here's Robinson's response.
Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before. Clarence Thomas famously once said he was the victim of a high-tech lynching. Well, it looks like Mark Robinson is too, by a man who refuses to stand on stage and debate me about the real issues that face you. Instead, they want to focus on salacious tabloid lies. We're not going to let them do that. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it.
We do know his words, and we will get to that in just a second. But a spokesperson for North Carolina's Board of Elections confirmed to NBC News this afternoon the deadline for Robinson to submit a written request to withdraw from this race has now passed. Lieutenant Governor submitted no such paperwork, so this race, as it stands, is on. The North Carolina Republican Party, they are standing by Robinson. The Trump campaign, they are too, at least to some degree, suggesting North Carolina is a vital part of the campaign without ever mentioning Robinson's name. But as we mentioned, Democrats are trying to make that connection in voters' minds. Fewer than 24 hours after the story broke, the DNC announcing plans to launch an ad blitz nearly a dozen billboards across North Carolina. And the Harris-Walz campaign released a brand new video of their own just this afternoon. Take a look.
And he's been an unbelievable Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson.
For me, there is no compromise on abortion.
I think you're better than Martin Luther King.
We could pass a bill saying you can't have an abortion in North Carolina for any reason.
The abortion in this country is about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down.
I've been with him a lot. I've gotten to know him, and he's outstanding.
Donald Trump and Mark Robinson. They're both wrong for North Carolina.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Worth underscoring. That ad we all just watched highlighted comments made by Robinson in public. Remember, Robinson's name will be right there with Donald Trump's on the ballot in North Carolina this election day. And given just how essential that state is for both campaigns, any change to the status quo could tip the scales in that state and, by extension, the race for president. And that is where we start this hour with NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton for us in Raleigh, North Carolina. Antonia, the Robinson campaign, the Trump campaign, they seem to think they can just hold on tight, let this all pass. Can they?
Well, that's the central question right now. And as you mentioned a moment ago, the Robinson campaign, because they missed that 11:59 deadline, in a way, you know, that's their statement. They're in this. There is no change to be made at this point. We saw the North Carolina GOP release a statement saying that they're essentially standing by their man. The Trump campaign, though, is a whole different ballgame because they're trying to walk this tightrope right now. We just got new NBC News reporting. Our colleague Dasha Burns has been talking to people all afternoon. And what they've found is that there are allies, both here locally in the North Carolina delegation and in the Trump campaign, who are pushing that campaign to actually rescind the endorsement and rethink that relationship here. However, at least at this point, Trump has not wanted to do so. He certainly hasn't taken that step yet, but he is going to be here campaigning tomorrow. And what we do know is Robinson is not going to be on that stage. So there's this sort of effort to not really comment on the contents of what has been said, but so still maintain some of that relationship, but try to avoid allowing Robinson and this scandal to potentially drag down the entire Republican ticket. That is certainly what Democrats are hoping is about to happen, and it is what Republicans are going to try to avoid, Alicia.
That is a delicate two-step for even the most seasoned dancer, so we will see just how that goes. You know, Antonia, it strikes me that there was a press conference earlier this afternoon. North Carolina's current governor, Roy Cooper, he's a Democrat. He made the case that a lot of Robinson's most radical comments, they were made right out in public. Just fill in some of that background for us.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you talk to some of the voters and political operatives here, I mean, I was here in 2022 covering the midterms. People talked about Mark Robinson back then, too. There is a long history of comments here. I mean, one of the ones that I've heard from voters that's come up time and time again is a time in which he referenced the Holocaust and seemed to suggest that it was hogwash, that he was casting doubt on some facts, some realities of the violence of how Jewish people were treated by Nazis. And, you know, for those voters who I spoke to today that therefore makes it not so hard for them to leap to the conclusion that perhaps he would have commented something similar on online forums, as CNN has reported. Then I've spoken to some Republican voters, though, who say that these are all allegations, that they don't really know what is true, what is not true, and so they plan still to vote for him. What's interesting about this state, though, it has one of the highest numbers of independent voters and moderates, people who do split ticket voting or who change their party cycle after cycle. And so Robinson really has the potential to turn those people off. They are the kind of voters who are consistently trying to get the rhetoric turned down in this country. They don't like comments like that. They certainly aren't comfortable with some of the anti-Semitic and Islamophobic things that he's both said on the record or online in the past, or possibly in these social media posts found by CNN. And so those are the voters that may be turned off here, and that the Harris campaign is going to aggressively go after here as they try to chart their path to victory in a state that, over the last 11 cycles, I think, has only gone for a Democrat once.
Antonia Hilton, live for us in Raleigh, North Carolina. Antonia, thank you for your reporting. Let's bring into our conversation former RNC spokesman and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, plus distinguished political scholar and professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude, and here at the table, Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University, Basil Smythler. Tim, when this is all over, this is all over, we're going to do a supercut of me saying to you, like, well, have we found the bottom? Is this the new low? Is this it? And you just say, like, I don't know where the bottom is anymore. That they saw everything he said in public. They didn't walk away from him. There's now this reporting, and he's still their guy.
Yeah, it's hard to get lower than sticking with your man when he says he's pro-slavery on a porn message board. But that is where we are. And this, I think, we can talk about this race and Mark Robinson specifically in a second. But I do think that this is just such a damning example of just the rot of the Republican Party and what the Republican voters are looking for. I mean, if you set up a system where you're saying, I want you to apply for a job. I want you to apply to be the Republican nominee for governor or Senate or president. And what we're looking for on your resume is how willing are you to suck up to a con man and a liar and Donald Trump? How shameful will you be in sucking up to this person? And the second thing we're looking for is how mean and cruel will you be to liberals and marginalized people? And that's all we're looking for. We're just looking for people that will suck up to a con man and will be mean to liberals. Well, the types of people that are going to submit their resume are Mark Robinson and Herschel Walker and Carrie Lake and Doug Mastriano. You're going to get sociopaths that apply. Like, if you're no longer looking for people that, ran a business or served in the military or served their community, like the types of things we used to look for in public service that the Democrats still look for in their public servants. If you're not looking for those attributes, if you're looking for who can suck up to Trump and who can be mean to Democrats, you're going to get people like Mark Robinson, who apparently spent like most of his adult life either on a message board on a porn site, posting racist and gross stuff, or inside a porn store, eating a pizza in the back room, where apparently he was 5 nights a week at times. And it's hard to know how this guy found time to go to like the bank or do anything. Maybe he didn't, because he also went bankrupt several times. So and this is the type of person you wouldn't hire to run like a fast food restaurant. The idea that he would be governor of one of the biggest states in the country is insane. The idea that he'd have voters that want him to be governor is just preposterous. But we got here because we're at the 9-year mark of this Trump era where what the voters have incentivized are all these wrong attributes.
I want to get right into it with the executive producer of From Russia with Lev, my colleague Rachel Maddow, who gets to add a new and important moniker to your resume. You are the executive producer of this amazing documentary that we just watched. Congratulations, first of all, my friend.
Thank you, Ali. It feels so great to have it out in the world. I have to just ask you, did you like it?
Not only did I like it, I was set up not to like it. And I don't mean that for any other reason than Lev's a complicated character. And it's a very honest documentary about the complexity of Lev. His wife talks about the complexity of Lev. Lev talks about the complexity of Lev. You had, I believe, the first interview with him all those years ago. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to know about Lev that I didn't already know. And you just stitched the whole thing together in a way that makes me wish I knew all this back then.
Yeah, you know, it does matter that he is a very compelling person.
Yes.
And, you know, you can tell this story in lots of different ways. You could tell this story from the perspective of Marie Yovanovitch, the ambassador who was unjustly forced out. You could tell it from the perspective of Zelensky and the way that he was extorted by Trump and the crime against Ukraine that was at the heart of the impeachment, which is the sort of culminating thing here. You could tell it from the perspective of Rudy Giuliani. You could tell it from the perspective of Trump. But to tell it from the perspective of Lev, you get this guy who is obviously a very flawed person. He's very open about the fact that he does have a background where he was a hustler. He was involved with organized crime. He came up in that environment. You know, the whole reason that the characters like Tony Andre were going after him for years is because he had all these legal judgments and debts that people were trying to collect from him. Definitely, you know, not a Boy Scout, but that's also part of the story. That's part of what's so amazing, that he ended up in the White House, that he ended up being tasked to do something by the President of the United States. And when you layer on top of that what I believe is his genuine repentance, and the fact that his phone has terabytes of evidence about what all these people did, it's unlike any other story that I know of from the whole Trump era or from any of my time in covering politics.
The thing that makes this so great right from the beginning is the degree to which Lev leans into the fact that he's a mob-like character. And in fact, mob-like characters, and in some cases, actual mobsters, were embedded in the Trump administration, which makes you wonder. The conclusion I come to after watching this is, who was really calling the shots during the Trump administration during this time that you cover?
Well, that is part of the worrying thing, right? Like that's why it's it's not just a character flaw, it's a national security problem when you've got criminals involved in the U.S. government. I mean, when the crooks take over the White House, that's not just bad for the American people, but it's really good for the crooks, because it means that anybody who's involved with people they shouldn't be involved with, anybody who's involved in crimes, also becomes susceptible to blackmail, to extortion, to doing all sorts of things that could pervert their work in what's supposed to be the public service. And so it's really bad to have crooks in charge. And in this case, in Ukraine, the permeability of the White House, the fact that the guy who ran a nightclub called Mafia Rave in Ukraine had access to the President of the United States, was seen as being a fantastic piece of news for the kinds of guys who would know a guy who ran the Mafia Rave Club in Kyiv. It's those sorts of characters shouldn't have access to the American president, to the counsel of the American president, to the State Department, to getting an ambassador fired who they wanted out of the way because she was anti-corruption. I mean, those sorts of people shouldn't be able to do it, but that's how the Trump administration ran.
That was a moment in the documentary when Lev was relating the way in which he talked to Donald Trump about Marie Yovanovitch being the problem, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine being the problem and needed to get rid of her, and how literally Donald Trump looks over his shoulder and says, get rid of her. She's done. Find a reason to get rid of her. And you realize in that moment the power that people like Lev Parnas had in the Donald Trump circle. This is a real story about a fake story, essentially. And Lev Parnas was involved in creating the fake story. There's a point where he's sitting in the control room overseeing an interview with the former Ukrainian Minister of Internal Affairs. And he describes it very well as old Soviet-style state TV propaganda. You have spent so much time talking about the funnel of misinformation in America, and you've basically done a documentary about the funnel of misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, when Lev says at one point in the film, you know, I eventually realized that there wasn't anybody who fed us any piece of this story who wasn't either working for the Russian government directly or working for Russian intelligence.
Right.
So this was a foreign influence operation to target the United States, right? The Director of National Intelligence has just said that Russia is targeting our elections again in 2024 to try to get Trump back in the White House as part of their overall effort to try to harm and weaken the United States. They're, you know, using their best weapon against the United States, which they think is Donald Trump in power. So they're doing it now. That's why why we've seen all these indictments, for example, from the Justice Department in recent days. Famously, we all remember what they did in 2016 to try to get Trump in power with the troll farms and the WikiLeaks and the hacking the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign and all that stuff. Well, that's 2016 and 2024. In between, in 2020, what they did was Lev. What they did was this project to create a story that would hopefully knock Joe Biden out of the running for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020 because Donald Trump knew that Biden had the best chance of beating him. Yep. And so he wanted him out. And so they ran the Russians ran an influence operation to try to essentially spoil Joe Biden's chances at winning that nomination. And they went at him by what they thought was his Achilles heel, which is his love for his son Hunter, his troubled son Hunter. And using a father's love for his son against him, I think is morally repugnant. I think it's evil. But it also was really consequential, both in Hunter's life and ultimately in the Biden family's life. And it led to the first Trump impeachment. It led to the change in Lev's life and him going to prison and all of this. But that was the origin of it.
In a few minutes, I'm going to talk to Lev and his wife, central characters in the show.
Great.
These documentaries don't work without central characters. As you mentioned, you can tell it from different perspectives, but when you tell it from too many perspectives, you lose the effect of the story. So Parnas is the central character in the story. He frames himself as the con man who got conned. At the same time, as we discussed, he really did help orchestrate this whole operation. So
yes,
I know where I stand on this, having watched this, but for the viewer, why should they believe Lev Parnas now?
It's a very good question, totally fair question, and one that we had to confront, and that I had long conversations with Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman, who are the director and the producer of the film at Raconteur Pictures. We talked about this a lot because that's core to the journalistic import of the film. Can you believe what he is saying? And there's two things that I think powerfully, maybe three things, but two main things that powerfully, I think, come down on the side of believing what Lev is saying. One of them is that first interview that he did with me in January 2020, which set this whole process in motion. I mean, you know how this works, Ali. When somebody gets arrested, somebody gets indicted, the one thing you can be damn sure they are not going to do next is appear on television doing an interview with with a real journalist, right? And yet, after Lev was arrested and indicted, he came and did that interview with me at great legal peril to himself. The Justice Department actually tried to remand him to custody because he did that interview with me. It was nothing, all of his sort of come to Jesus, here's what I know, let me testify, let me tell you what I know, let me show you what's on my phone. All of that stuff was not only not in his own interest, it was against his interest directly and may have very well led to a lot of the legal peril that he found himself in. It was not self-interested, and I find that important. The incentives all went the other way. The other part of it is that he really does have a record of all of the things that he's talking about. He's got thousands and thousands and thousands of text messages, thousands of documents in his iCloud, thousands of photos. And he just gave us full access to all of that to make this film, which was the most amazing fact-checking process I've ever sort of been through for a guy who has such an incredible story to tell about such important people.
We watched together a powerful moment at the end of the film, and now that it's out there, we can talk about the end of the film, where Lev Parnas finally meets Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
How'd that come together?
So we had a totally different ending planned for the film. And in his final interview, there was the series of interviews with Lev that made the sort of core of the film. And in his final interview, he said to director Billy Corben, you know, I am going to go to my probation officer and ask for permission to leave the state of Florida because I would like to go to California and apologize to Hunter Biden face to face.
Wow.
Billy was like, yeah, okay, sure, I want a pony. You know, like, I know that you want that. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. But Lev made it happen. He figured out how to contact Hunter Biden. He asked him, he said, listen, I'm doing this documentary. I would like to apologize to you face to face. You do not have to say yes, but would you consider it? And if so, can I bring a camera? And none of us believed it would. I didn't even bother putting it on my calendar. I never thought it would happen. And then It just did. And we didn't know when Lev walked in that room whether Hunter was going to, punch him out or talk to him or accept his offer his forgiveness and accept his apology. And it was just a really remarkable moment given what Lev was the author of in Hunter's life.